What is up, guys? It's Troy at the Full Setup here, back with another streaming tutorial guide. And today I'm going to be showing you all of my settings that I use on the Fat channel on the PreSonus Revelator dynamic microphone. So this is setting like your high pass filter, your expander, your compressor, and also your EQ. Now I have already done a full review of this microphone. So if you want to hear this compared to the Beacon microphone, definitely make sure you subscribe and go and check that out. And I'm also going to do a separate video where we look at all of the routing options. So this is how you configure it to send a stream mix into OBS, bringing in Discord, like your guest sounds, maybe sending audio out to Zoom and Teams. All of that advanced routing stuff I am going to cover in another video for you. But today we're just going to be focusing on the Fat channel effects. Now you could just copy the settings that I am using here today, but obviously we all have different voices. We speak at different levels. So I would just advise that you use these as a base canvas. Now, before we start tweaking all of these settings and me showing you why and how I have set them up like this, I want to show you a couple of cool tips that you want to do before you start with this. So right now we're obviously monitoring this in real time and we're able to make changes. But when you're monitoring yourself, there is obviously your voice isn't going to sound quite like how it is when it's recorded. So if you wanted to record a section and then edit it, you know, kind of like the Beacon mic where you can record for 10 seconds, you can do this, but you do need to use another piece of software. So when you register this microphone, it also comes with the Studio One software, and there is a little bit of a learning curve to it compared to other DAWs that I've used. I find when I haven't used it in a while, I might get a little bit stressed of it. But generally, when I get a new microphone that I'm kind of pairing with my IO24, I would probably be maybe recording a 30-second or 60-second snippet where I've kind of got my whole dynamic range on how I'm talking, and then I can adjust stuff to suit because the Fat channel is also on Studio One. So as you can see here, I'll just drag the Fat channel over, and then maybe if we wanted to just make some changes to that audio there on the EQ, we could just maybe do whatever we wanted. We could then on the compressor section, you know, pick a different compressor, change things there. All of this is available. And then what you can do here is if you press this little button here, you can then go export as a channel preset. So as you can see here, this is going to store it in Studio Live. All we need to do is just come back here to PreSonus, and then we'll pick the device. So again, we would just go with the Revelator mic for this video, go to Fat channel, and then you can save it in there. Here you can see I've got one called Studio One. Now to get it to show in here, essentially what you have to do is just close it all down, including the process down here in your system tray. Close all of that off, and then when you click on your profile button here, there you can see it's a local preset. Then I'll just import that one back over, and there you can see it's called Studio One. Okay, just going to delete that because I need it for something else, and that would then put it in as one of our presets. Another thing as well that's very important as well while you're building up these presets is for every change that you do in here, I generally come back out and then I save it. So you click here, store, and then it saves it to a profile. The reason why I do this, and I will show you right away here, is we'll go to a empty preset. We're going to be doing this a lot in this video. And then I'm going to come over to the EQ section, and I'm going to put it to a passive EQ, and I'm going to turn that on. And then when I come back to a standard one, oh, look at that. It's got rid of all my EQ settings. So it's really cumbersome and annoying it does that. It will do the same if you switch between compressors and EQs. So if I just come back over there now, that now has brought everything back in as I like it with my EQ and all of the other stuff. So I just recommend doing that. Now, the Revelator mic does come with some presets ready installed. So right now what you're listening to is the Broadcast Basic. And I find on all of these, the gate is definitely way too much. There is also Broadcast Light. So this is a test of the Broadcast Light setting. And this right now is a test of the Broadcast Radio setting. I'm going to go back to my one. And the good thing with all of those is that it sort of dials in different settings here. So if I go to, say, a separate profile, and then let's just go with EQ, I go to vintage. As you can see here, it's applied all those settings. So it's a really good base canvas and something that you can work with. Okay, but I do find them just to be not quite where I want them to be. You're far much better building a custom profile. Okay, then over to the Fat channel. Now, the most important thing before you're doing the Fat channel is to make sure you've got your gain set correctly, okay? So you ideally want your peaks to be coming around here. As you can see, I'm not quite there, so maybe the -10. But as I say, but, you can see there, that is where I'm coming up. So if my general torque here, that's coming somewhere between maybe -22 or -15, was actually higher up here. So then when I said but, what it would end up doing is being very much up here, and we could come close to clipping. So your gain is going to be somewhere between 36 and 42 dB, okay, depending on how you talk. Okay, so you want to get that set correctly. Your microphone position and placement is going to make a big change to your sound, okay? Not having the microphone properly positioned and talking into it correctly, this stuff here isn't going to solve those problems. So I've got the microphone about 4 inches away from me. I find that this microphone does have quite a strong proximity effect, like now when I'm right up on it. And I've got it coming in at about a 45-degree angle into my mouth. So I've got it slightly over to the left of me. Okay. Now, one thing is you don't want to talk at the mic, you talk past the microphone. I always like to imagine that I have got someone sat maybe 2 or 3 foot behind my monitor. If that person isn't going to hear me properly while I'm having a conversation with me, if I can't project my voice to them, then guess what? You're not projecting your voice to the microphone either. A little tip there, again, like I said, I never really practice what I preach, but that's something that I like to do. Over to the fat channel, and that's what you came here for. So the first one is the high pass filter. The general rule of thumb is that you set this to 80 hertz. But sometimes I go a little bit lower, maybe like 70 or 60. It depends on how I'm building this little bass bump up here. I may well dial it down a little bit. Now, if your voice is super bassy, you may find that you need to set it to 100, but I wouldn't go much above that. Okay, if you've got this very bassy voice and there's some thicker things that doesn't sound very good lower end, you're better to do a slight cut in there, kind of do a big high pass filter. So yeah, I always go somewhere between, depending on your voice, it's going to be between 60 and 100 hertz. And most people recommend that you do 80 hertz. Okay. Over to the gate then. Now, as a gate, it's not very good. Okay. So I'm just going to turn it off for a second and turn it off from an expander. So here are all the sort of settings that you can use for the gate. So whether it's threshold, attack, your range is how much it's going to reduce that down. So if we just turn that back on there, as you can see, that's how much it's going to reduce my sound afterwards on my voice. And I've messed around with all the settings in here and I don't like it as a gate. And I've heard a lot of other people complain about this as a gate as well. Gates can be very tricky to set up at times, and I've mostly got it in other softwares and other pieces of hardware, but I'm not a fan of it on any of the Revelator series. But one thing I'm a fan of gate over gates anyway, generally on any hardware that I use, is an expander. So a gate is just going to turn off as you stop talking, where it's going to turn on and it's going to cut out all the sounds. An expander is actually just going to reduce those sounds. Annoyingly, there isn't a ratio here, so it's set to auto. Okay, so we're going to set a threshold. So everything below that threshold, it's going to expand down. And again, this is somewhere where I would recommend either testing in Studio One or recording in another piece of software. What I like to set my threshold is that it's going to cut out a lot of my breaths. So as I breathe deeper and stuff like that, it's going to reduce them down. And then also reduce the sounds on my keyboard switches, okay, my mechanical keyboard switches. If you are using blues or clicky switches, like tactile switches, I wouldn't try and cut them out completely, because you'll find that you need to set your threshold more to something like -40 or -45. And as I talk there, you are going to hear that it's not quite right. So you don't want to go too low. So for most people, I would recommend your threshold to be somewhere between -55 and -70. Okay. Now the attack is how quick that expander is going to kick in, and the release is how long it's going to stand for. Now, generally on a gate and a compressor, I go for quite fast attack and release times. An expander, you want it to be a little bit more, I found. Anyway, PreSonus is one you do. So my attack is at 20 milliseconds, so that's when it's going to come on. And then my release is at 700, okay? And I find that works okay. But ideally for your attack, I would say you're going to be somewhere between like 10 and 25 milliseconds, so play and get it to suit with your voice. And for release, somewhere between 400 and like 750, okay? Now, the key filter was something that I wasn't using that much on my IO24, and there was a mistake here. So as you can see, as I'm not talking, that is how much it is expanding that audio down. So whether it's the noise floor, my breaths, my keyboard, it's then bringing it down 36 dB from that sound. So watch what happens when I turn the key filter off. You can see that it didn't reduce it as much. So in some senses, I just turn it and stop talking, and just get it to somewhere that I like. And I found it's always somewhere between 700 and 800. I think the default settings anyway for a lot of them with the key filters are like 798. So just move the key filter until it is doing a good bit of expansion. Over to the compressor and EQ then. Well, you can swap these around depending on where you want them. I generally find that I like my EQ to come after my compression on this. That's just where I go for. Okay, you might want your EQ before. Now, there are a few compressors that you can use here outside. So the first one is the fat one. And honestly, I haven't got it to really get, I think you got to boost it quite a bit. Let me boost it there. And then as you can see there, then you change your output and you've got ratio, attack and release here. So yeah, I haven't been too big on the fat compressor just yet. But if there is one compressor that I really like that can also be a limiter, it is the tube compressor. So this is based on the LL2A. So generally for gain, I put it somewhere between 48 and 52. So if we just go 52 dB there, and you can hear it's just bringing that, it's bringing a nice bit of tone into my voice. And then you just move the peak reduction until that dial starts moving. And that was a little bit too much there. So now if I go, but, there we go. We've just got a little bit of dial movement. So you just slide these to suit to how you want it to sound in your voice. And I feel this adds a really nice, rich sound to the microphone. I really love this tube compressor. But most of you are going to be using the standard compressor. And again, compressors are very subjective to how you want it to sound and how you talk and how you want it to compress. Okay, so we're going to go through all of the settings that I use. As you can see here, I'm mostly around this -18, -22 dB area. I peak a little bit there, but I'm not coming in too much. I'm sort of controlling my voice anyway. And this is just going to vary. A lot of people say -20 dB is a good place to start. So it depends on how loud you're coming in, okay? Generally, you want your threshold to be somewhere between 4 and 8 dB lower than how you're talking. So I've just got -24 on today, and maybe that's a bit too much. Again, we just want this compressor to be coming in light, essentially. As you can see there, as I get a bit louder, it is compressing it a little bit too much. But we'll keep it at -24 because that's what we've done for the whole video, because we can adjust this with our ratio a bit. So find a threshold that works for you. Again, like I said, you just want it to be ticking in a little bit. You don't want to be constantly at like -6 or -12, okay? The next thing then is the ratio. I think we'll do ratio before attack and release. I'd probably just recommend setting it to auto at first while you get your ratio. So I'll show you how ratios work. So here you can see we're on a 1-to-1 ratio, so we have no compression coming through. So if we now go to a 2-to-1 compression ratio here, and this is somewhere where I prefer to be, is always between 2 and 3. So as you can see here, that now is starting at 12 and it comes down to here. So what's that doing? So for every 2 dB that we go over our threshold at -24, it's going to reduce it. It's going to boost it by 1 dB, which is why it's gone to -12, because that's halfway between 0 and -24. So if we now go to a 3-to-1 compression ratio, like I was using here, you can see how it adjusts it more. Now, if you're someone that goes from being extremely quiet to quite loud, then a 4-to-1 ratio is probably where you're going to go. I see all these streaming channels always recommending a 4-to-1 and saying that's what you should set. That's what you should set to voice. It isn't. For a lot of people, it can be too much. If you just talk at a consistent level, 4-to-1 is too much. My personal favorite is actually 2.5.1. I think that's a good level to compress. Now, the attack and release is going to be very subjective to what you want, okay? I like a fast attack, so I generally always go somewhere between 2 and 10 milliseconds for the attack. And the attack and release, the way you adjust these is also going to shape how your voice sounds while you're being compressed. So again, I see a lot of people with quite big releases, so maybe like a 400 millisecond release, and I find that ends up just keeping the compressor on too long for me. Maybe it sounds better to you right now, but again, I like these things to be subtle. I don't want heavy stuff. I think it's like I said at the beginning of the video, I need to practice what I preach, but you should be spending more time on focusing on your voice and how you're talking before this stuff. So again, that's what I like to go for. But you can change this. I'm not adverse to using a 250 millisecond release, to be fair. Okay? It doesn't really budge me. The next thing over here is the makeup gain. We'll come over to key filter in a minute. So that is how much extra gain you're going to be adding in after your reduction and bringing it up to level. I don't like to add too much here. You could go to 8 or 10 dB if you want. But the thing is, you can also add this. This slider comes afterwards. I think all of this is pre-fader. So it comes before this slider. So then after you've done all of this, you could just add more gain on your stream mix to get you up to level, or you can change the output gain here. Okay, so you can adjust it. So you've got 3 places you can adjust it. So just play with it and decide what you like best. Okay. So what is the key filter? So the key filter is, a lot of people say, oh yeah, isn't this device great? It does have a de-esser. Well, yeah, it does. But all the de-esser is a key filter here. So my S's are generally at about 5.7 to 6 kilohertz. So if I set that there at maybe 5.8, 5.9, that is then going to compress those frequencies. But that's what it's going to be compressing. It's only going to trigger off when I'm doing my S's. So then I lose a full compressor across my entire voice range. So I would stay away from that unless you're adding in a compressor somewhere else afterwards and you wanted to use that as a de-esser. Could be a good way to go because, you know, there's a lot more compressing VSTs and the built-in compressor in OBS that you could use versus, you know, de-esser VSTs that you can get. They're a bit harder to find for free anyway. So next up then we have the EQ section. So that is a vintage EQ. So here you can set like bands and boost it. So we're going to do a little boost there at 110. I'm probably then maybe going to remove a little bit at 360 or maybe 700. Probably remove a little bit there at 700 hertz. And then I'm probably going to say, let's boost a little bit and add in a little bit of top here in the top end. So there's a vintage EQ, nice and simple. And then there is also a passive EQ as well. So again, I'd probably go to 100 hertz. And then we can boost a little bit of that in there, you know, and just tweak things to how we want. You've also got Q bandwidths, attenuation. And again, maybe I'll come back here. So I'll go at 4K and then we'll just boost a little bit in there and maybe bring in some sparkle and top. There's all that cool stuff you can do. But the one that we're all going to really want to be using is this EQ here. So this is like a parametric EQ. Technically, there's 5 bands if you included the high pass filter, but really we've only got 4 to play with. Now, the golden thing with EQ is that you always cut before you boost. So I'd recommend using at least 2 of these cutting, okay? Now, because I'm going to maybe put a little bit of a boost in my bass voice, I would start on this low mid one. So essentially what you need to do is tighten up the Q, which you'll see in a second. So start that into like between 8 and 10. And then you just increase the gain up, okay? So I generally don't really go much more than about 7 dB. And then all I do is I sweep until I find some areas in my voice that I don't like. And for me anyway, I always find there's this sort of boomy, room tony sort of sound somewhere maybe around 200 to 210, okay? So then I'll just bring that down, maybe go about 3 dB or something, and then just bring the Q out a little bit. Now, like I said, always cut before boost. But this is just me because I know my voice now. So again, I'm going to come here to maybe 110. Oh. And I'm just going to add in a 1.5 dB boost there. And again, then this is where you can use these cues to sort of shape what's going on. So I'll just adjust these two here. Like I want it to cut a little bit more out and sort of do this slope. Okay. And again, you can do the same here with your cue. Again, I'm just going to drop that down there. And that's just getting that little boost that I want with a little bend. Like I said, you should always cut beforehand. It's just because I know how I generally like my voice to sound on a dynamic microphone that I like. So the next one is a little bit of a tricky one because I know that there's generally somewhere as well around here, maybe somewhere in that sort of 4 to 550 range that I like to do a little bit of maybe a boost or a cut, depending on the microphone. But there's one thing I do know, and that is that I'm nasally. So I will cut around 1K and I generally go about minus 4.5. I don't recommend going much more than 5 dB on a cut. And then maybe I'll just stretch that Q out a little bit. Now this microphone does have a nice little bit of sparkle to it, but I'm just going to add in a little bit more. So I'm going to come up to this high one here. And let's just say 3,500, 3K there. 1 dB ever so slightly. And you can see it's just a bump there. I'm going to press that one there. And as you can see, It's just adding in a little bit of extra something in the top end then, just nice and simple. So again, I recommend for most people, you'd probably be doing 2 cuts and then you'd be boosting the bass and boosting the highs a little bit, or maybe doing little cuts there. But yeah, I tend to not do too much in here because I know I'm going to EQ afterwards. But this is just, a nice little EQ that I like to do for maybe a live situation or web conferencing. Okay. Next up, then we have the limiter. Again, you can see the levels that I'm coming in. I don't need to use the limiter, so I don't think it's something that, is massively needed. But by the time you start to boost this audio up afterwards, you may want to turn the limiter on. But I found as you sort of dial this, you can see there it really starts to cut your voice before where you actually are. So if you're going to be adding this into your mix afterwards, I would literally set this to like -1 or -2 dB. It really doesn't need to be on that much, okay? So that's going to limit it here, okay? And obviously on the stream mixes, again, you could be boosting your audio up. So that's just going to put a little bit of a limiter in there. But obviously you can also limit it in OBS as well. Finally, over at the end here, we're not going to really go into any of this, but you do have all of the voice effects as well. Because I never use these and don't really know much about them, I'm not going to cover it because I wouldn't be able to recommend to you whether they're good or not. But I'm sure there'll be someone out there that's covering the voice effects. So yeah, that is all of my fat channel settings. They're all done. We're happy with them. Like I said, you should be making a change between every one that you go over to here, but we're just going to create a new one. So we will call this YouTube 2. We will just click on anyone. Let's just click on empty preset 8. And we will go store. And then over here, we'll just copy it over as well, just so we've got it saved on our local preset for firmware updates. So there we go then. There is the demo of the Fat Channel. I hope that's been a useful video for you. If there's anything that you would like to see me cover on this microphone that maybe I didn't show today, or maybe in depth in more detail, please do let me know. If you are struggling getting this set up and sounding how you want, I am quite busy at the moment, but if you do come over to the Discord, there should be a link below there. I will try and make some time to run through some settings for you. Also more than happy, as long as it's not like hundreds or thousands of people asking me, also more than happy to just have like a quick Zoom call or something like that. And I can just have a little tweak of your settings for you as well. Make sure you subscribe and I'll be back with some more content very soon.